Summer is winding down on the remote but picturesque Scottish island of Imrie. The locals and shopkeepers are preparing to batten down the hatches for what is likely to be a long and hard winter. Nothing much ever happens on Imrie. It's a quiet, restful, peaceful place, usually. But something strange is stalking the countryside. Something murderous. Something unearthly. Prepare to meet the Nightmare Man. Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is Paul Mount. We're talking about the Nightmare Man today. This is a 4-part BBC thriller science fiction serial that aired in the spring of 1981. Watching this last night, I was struck by two things. One, never actually seen it all before. And two, I do wish the BBC or anybody in this country would make something like this these days. I know that the television world has changed, the industry has changed. Television programs, dramas particularly, are much more expensive than they were back in the early 1980s, but so refreshing to watch an intelligent, well put together, well written, well acted drama that wasn't about the police, that wasn't about a troubled detective with a dark past investigating the activities of a serial killer or some murder on a beach somewhere. Why can't we do stuff like this these days? I hadn't seen The Nightmare Man before. This DVD version came out in 2005, I noticed. And I remember watching the first episode and putting the DVD on, watching the first episode and thinking, this is rather good. But I never went back to it for some reason. This was the imperial phase of the DVD revolution, of course. There were so many DVDs being released of films, great cult classic TV shows. I dare say I just didn't find the time to go back to this. I really wish I had. Having watched it again last night, this is a very taut and very atmospheric, well done thriller, directed by one of the great maestros of British TV in the 60s and 70s into the 80s, Douglas Camfield, whose name is associated with so many of the classic Doctor Who serials, and with a script written by the great Robert Holmes, also a name we associate with some of the very best Doctor Who serials of the 70s, adapting a book written by David Wilshire. I was reading the viewing notes that came with the DVD for a bit of background material, and it's so interesting to hear about how this series came about. TV isn't made this way anymore. TV isn't commissioned this way. If you want to make a TV serial these days, there are umpteen focus groups and commissioners meetings and discussions and budget plans and all sorts of things that take months and months and months. This serial came about because there was a gap in the BBC drama schedule for a 4-part drama. This is the time when BBC used to make dramas of all sorts of length. There are now very few proper half-hour dramas. I know there have been a couple in the last few years, but they were fairly routine back in the 70s and 80s. And the slot had appeared and BBC drama department needed to fill it. And they wanted something that was science fiction. Again, glory days when those two words didn't strike fear and terror into the hearts of viewers and commissioners alike, when people had the imagination to possibly watch something that was a little bit more out there than a lot of the stuff we get these days. They were looking for a genre drama. The producer assigned to come up with this series was Ron Craddock, and it was so interesting to read how the decision was made to do The Nightmare Man. This is a book which Ron Craddock had read. He also had another book as an option for a serial, and he gave both books to his secretary to read over the weekend and for her to make a decision about which one should be turned into a serial. She came back, had really enjoyed the book that The Nightmare Man was based on, which was called The Child of Vodyanoi. And that's how the decision was made to make this serial. It's another world, really, when you consider the hoops that program makers have to jump through today to get even the most mundane series on screen. To think it was possible to get an idea to do a series of this type, and then the decision on which one to make resting on a producer's secretary. Fantastic. I love hearing those stories about those great days of innovative television when programs were made on the hoof and on a whim because they wanted to do something. They found the money and they got the crews and cast together and made these things. Once the decision was made on what serial to make, it went into production fairly quickly. Robert Holmes wrote the scripts. Douglas Camfield was assigned to direct it. Douglas was a director who was well known on Doctor Who, and anything he worked on for having a military precision in the way that he put his shows together. He ran them like military maneuvers, and that's something which shows up in this serial, particularly in the 4th episode, which does have a militaristic bent. It was cast, it was filmed on location in and around Port Isaac and the area around it for a few weeks in January and February. It was edited, it was on screen in May. Boom, boom, boom. Amazing, fantastic. And I love that sort of spirit of television, that they could make things and get them on screen really quickly. It's not like, again, and I keep on banging on about TV these days, which takes months and months to make and years before things get on the screen. They would make something fairly low budget, get it put together on the screen, onto the next thing. So what is The Nightmare Man all about then, beyond the slightly mysterious introduction I gave it before the credits? As I said, it's based on a book by David Wilshire. He was a dentist who wrote in his spare time. He'd had a book published called The Homosaur, and then he followed it up with a book called The Child of Vodyanoi, which he tried to get made into a serial. He was always interested in getting these made for television, even though he had no experience himself in script writing, which is presumably why Robert Holmes was assigned to write the scripts. And it's interesting that the lead character of the series is a dentist, because he felt that dentists didn't get their time in the sun on TV dramas, so he thought he'd redress the balance a little bit. It's a really richly atmospheric 4-part serial, which in many ways would suit the then format of Doctor Who. 4 half-hour episodes, a mystery, an isolated location, a strange killer who appears to be something more than human, a mysterious craft washed up on the beach, the military turning up. You could imagine the Doctor and Sarah Jane arriving on this remote Scottish island, getting involved in this mystery and something strange and creepy which is lurking out in the dark. It is classic Doctor Who stuff, which may be one of the reasons I enjoyed it so much while I watched it last night. The serial starts with a very small passenger ship chugging into the harbour at the island of Inverness. On board it, we see a character played by Jonathan Newth, who himself had a Doctor Who connection a couple of years earlier when he appeared in the not very good Tom Baker Doctor Who serial Underworld. He plays Colonel Howard. Also on board the boat, we see an attractive blonde woman that he sort of speaks to, but she doesn't particularly acknowledge him. He wanders off into the village. He finds himself in the local store, which is run by Fiona Patterson, played by a very young Celia Imrie. He strikes up a conversation with her. He tells her that he's got a few weeks leave. He's just decided to visit the island. He's always meant to go there. We also meet James Warwick, who plays Michael Gafkin. James Warwick was a popular TV actor of the time. Later the next year, he would appear in one of the classic Peter Davison Doctor Who stories, Earthshock. But here he plays dentist Michael Gafkin, who returns to the island. He's clearly in a relationship with Fiona. They plan to go out for a meal in the evening at the local pub, because they've just had a delivery of duck from the mainland. Life seems to be ambling along quite peacefully on this very pleasant, laid-back island. Michael goes off to play golf at the local golf course, where he makes a horrific discovery. It's a horribly mutilated and bloodied body that's been hidden in the undergrowth nearby. He is appalled. He notifies the local police, who are led by Inspector Inskip, played by the great Maurice Reeves. Again, he has a bit of a Doctor Who connection, because he appeared in Robert Holmes's Caves of Androzani story a few years later. And they begin to investigate, and they discover that the body has been literally torn apart, killed by a blow to the back of the head. There are some strange dental indentations on the body. We have seen earlier in the episode a number of scenes taken from the point of view of something which clearly has breathing difficulties. Heavy breathing, stentorian, rasping, gasping for breath, and this sort of blood-red filter that suggests something very, very odd is prowling the island. The islanders, who we see, and we don't actually see that many people on the island, which is one perhaps minor criticism. They are unnerved by this killing, because this sort of thing doesn't happen on this island, and the police investigation doesn't seem to be coming up with anything. The island becomes cut off from the mainland by a mist which has rolled in, which increases the sense of unease and dread and creeping sense of terror that there's something out there which could pounce and kill at any time. There are more victims. A local botanist, played by Tony Sibbald, who had appeared a few years earlier in Terror of the Zygons, a 4-part serial directed by Douglas Camfield. He is attacked at the end of the first episode and again brutalized and mutilated. More reports come in. A farmer reports that one of his sheep has been ripped to pieces. There is clearly something not right on the island. And this is the basis of the first 3 episodes, which are incredibly atmospheric and really well done. Robert Holmes was a terrific writer. He knew how to write characters. He knew how to write dialogue. And all the main characters in this, from the police, from Michael Gafkin, played by James Warwick, from Celia Imrie's character. There's also another police officer, Sergeant Karch, who's played by the brilliant James Cosmo. They all seem like real people because their dialogue is so naturalistic. The way they talk, the relationships come across so well. It's a cast that's relishing these characters and relishing the dialogue that they've got. They all feel real, and you do feel as if you're part of this community which is isolated and under attack from something that appears to be alien. And I think it's in episode 2 or episode 3 that Michael Gafkin suggests that it is alien, much to the shock and disbelief of everybody else around him. Those 3 episodes are really so well put together and so well done. Douglas Camfield, on presumably quite a tight budget, puts it together with such finesse, really building on this feeling of creeping menace, of something potentially unearthly, which is on the island and killing people and animals. One of the things that makes it work as well is the fact that it was all shot on outside broadcast video cameras. So it's all on location. There are no studio sequences. Normally at this time, you would have drama productions that would have their studio indoor scenes done at Television Centre in London. Any location footage would often be on film or on outside broadcast. But here it's all done on outside broadcast cameras. And that gives it a sense of intimacy that you don't get with film because it's on video effectively. You do feel again as if you're there. There is a closeness and proximity to the characters. You feel as if you're part of the action. And the fact that everything takes place on an island which has been cut off from the mainland, there's no communication with the mainland. It really is that classic Doctor Who base under siege thing, which people like Robert Holmes would do so well. So those first 3 episodes are absolutely terrific, and they rattle by. They're half an hour long. They're so well paced, so well written. I think, unfortunately, I have to say that the 4th episode is a slight letdown. The 4th episode is where we discover exactly what's going on. We discover that Jonathan Newth's character, Colonel Howard, isn't quite who he thought he was. And we discover what the creature is that's stalking the countryside. We discover what the craft is that is found in episode 2 or 3. This capsule which is washed up on the shore. And although it has a science fiction rationale behind it, it's perhaps disappointing to hardcore sci-fi fans that I'll tell you now, it isn't a creature from outer space, but it does have a sci-fi backdrop which works within the context of the story. I think the audiences might have been building themselves up to see a monster in the classic style and might have been a bit, that it isn't that. The ending itself, the resolution is slightly flat in that it all comes to a head once we find out what the creature is. It all comes to a head a little bit too quickly and things go back to normal a little bit too quickly. And there are certain unresolved plot points. There's a bunch of characters that we meet at a Coast Guard station up on the hill above the town. One of them, incidentally, is played by Jeff Stewart, who later went on to become PC Reg Hollis for many years in the bill, and who would himself appear in Doctor Who the following year. They are attacked by the creature during the night, and we don't actually find out what happens because certain things happen there. Jeff Stewart's character attacks the creature with a flare. There's a really nice scene of the creature stumbling through the dark, burning, and then we see the creature pull him through a window. That's referred to that something's happened, but we assume that they've all been killed. And at the end of the serial, it is a bit like a Star Trek episode where everybody's going, well, that was a bit worrying, but everything's back to normal now. The fact that lots of people have died is sort of swept under the carpet. The relationship between James Warwick and Celia Imrie sort of doesn't come to anything at the end. So I think the 4th episode is a bit of a disappointment, but it's made up for by the fact that those first 3 are really gripping, very well put together, very taut, very tense. And watching it now, you realise that it was a great time when television could do things like this. Purely randomly, it wasn't a high-profile serial. BBC didn't give it much in the way of publicity. It's never been repeated. it sort of came and went, which when you consider the people who were involved, the cast, many of whom went on to become very well known, particularly Celia, Imrie and James Cosmo, and Camfield and Robert Holmes, who weren't exactly newcomers or slouches in the TV industry. You think they would have made a bit more of it, but this was a random 4-part serial that was screened at a time when BBC schedules were full of bigger dramas, I suppose. So it just was an offering rather than a main course as big dramas are these days. But it's a very good, very entertaining serial. Highly recommended if you've never seen it. I will be interested to hear if any of my viewers do remember this one, because I think it has a certain following, not helped by the fact that it sort of disappeared after its screening. But it came out on DVD. I know a lot of people would have picked it up and watched it. And I'd love to hear from anybody out there who remembers it, even if you've not seen it since then. It's called The Nightmare Man. You can still find the DVD available. It's a bit pricey now because it's out of print, I believe. But I think it's still available on the secondary market and on Amazon. And if you've never seen it, if you're interested in obscure bits of British cult TV, highly recommend it. I'm going to give The Nightmare Man a good 8 out of 10 because I had a good time with it last night. I knew broadly where it was going, so I knew what the ending was, so I didn't suffer the disappointment that some contemporary viewers might have had, because I knew it wasn't what the series was building it up to be. But it was nice to piece it all together, and it's always great to see some of these great sterling British actors doing good work. I mean, they're great performances. The acting is superb in this. It's very naturalistic, and it really benefits from that sense of being there in the middle of it all. That's The Nightmare Man. So if you have seen it, please let me know what your memories are of it and what you think of it, and if you're going to track it down. I would love to hear from you. I would also love you to subscribe to the channel if you're new here. All you need to do for that is to press the subscribe button there, ding ding ding, or you could even click on this QR code with your phone and you'll be subscribed. It'll be great to have you on board. I think it's about 42% of viewers aren't subscribers, which isn't bad by YouTube standards, but it'd be great to have you on board. And a big welcome to all the new subscribers who've joined up since yesterday's video on Night of the Demon, which is doing a lot better than I thought it would. Lots of new subscribers, lots of comments. I love that sort of thing. So please stick around because there's lots of stuff to come here on my world of stuff. I'll see you soon until I do. Keep taking the stuff.